Welcome to SpanReads, not your typical rereads podcast, a 17-shard series where we reread the Cosmere and are giant nerds about it. Today we will be talking about Warbreaker and its place in the broader Cosmere. I'm Ian, and joining me is Mish.
Hi, firstRainbowRose.
Jessie.
Hello, I'm Lady Lameness.
And Katie.
Hello, I'm AonEne.
And I'm Weiry. And this episode will have spoilers through Rhythm of War, because that's the last thing that was released as of recording. Though not as of release.
Yeah, by the time this comes out, we'll have at least less metal. I don't think anything else, but yeah.
Possibly Tress. I don't know what month we're doing.
Yeah,
this
might be next year. Yeah, I don't really know any more for these. We just record them and edit them, and then Eric's like, okay, we're doing this one now. I'm like, okay, here you go.
Yeah.
The Warbreaker and the Cosmere.
Yeah, it was very pleasant going back to this book after it's been a while since I last reread it. And I can remember when I first read it, there was so much we didn't know. By the time I had joined the fandom, we had the name endowment for the shard, but we didn't know Edgley was the name of the vessel yet. We didn't know the 5 scholars were world hoppers.
Wait, all 5 of them are world hoppers?
Yeah, all 5 of them got off world.
By the time of this book, or before this book happened, they had
Before, long before. That's how Nightblood is a thing. They went to Roshar, saw Shardlands, was like, we can do that. But yeah, they had all been off planet. They are, according to Silverlight, which we still don't know about, the 5 scholars were the pioneering, early Cosmere scholars. Which is why it makes sense that Vasher uses the term investiture.
It is really interesting thinking of the timeline of when they must have gone off world, because it didn't seem, at least from reading Warbreaker, I never got the sense that there was that much time that had passed between when they became returned and when the many war happened. There was time in between, but it didn't seem like it was years and decades or hundreds of years or anything. But they got off world. They seemed to do a bunch of other research, but then they also did all the stuff with the many war. And a lot of the stuff with the many war seemed like early day research making mistakes and not understanding what your discoveries are going to do in the world. But if they've done a bunch of that beforehand, I just don't understand the timeline of it.
Yeah, it's we need Warbreaker secret history.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, okay, we know these things. How do they work in conjunction with each other?
Less of secret history and more of Warbreaker prequel.
Yeah, this book was written after Mistborn Era 1. And the story goes, I think it was Moshe, or it might have been Tom Doherty. Somebody came to Brandon and said, hey, you wrote Elantris, which was kind of dark and dreary. Then you wrote Mistborn, and they're there's ash falling from the sky, and it's just dirty and dark. Maybe you should do something with more color. And Brennan just okay, I'll make a color-based world with a color-based magic system. I wouldn't call it a color-based magic system personally. Color is involved, but it's not. The colors don't really do anything. It just matters that there is some. There's just so many parallels between Warbreaker and Mistborn Era 1. It's the God King and the Lord Ruler, Denth and Kelsier. Did any of you notice any other parallels?
I mean, while you were talking, I kept on thinking about Denth and wanting a redemption arc for him. And, I kept on thinking about Moash and how so many people don't want a redemption arc for him. But Moash is the same way, where he's well, I've done terrible things. I guess I'm a bad guy now.
Yeah, the main thing I think that makes Denth an interesting character and Moash a boring character is Denth doesn't fully accepts that like he did bad things. Like he is a bad person. Moash is like, does not accept culpability at all. Like he gives that to Odium. But like this was something I don't think I've ever noticed before, but there is a scene where Vasher is talking with Nightblood. The sword couldn't see, but with his powerful twisted biochroma, it could sense life in people. Both were things Nightblood had been created to protect. It was strange how easily and quickly protection could cause destruction. Sometimes Vasher wondered if the two weren't really the same thing. Protect a flower, destroy the pests who wanted to feed on it. Protect a building, destroy the plants that could have grown in the soil. Protect a man, live with the destruction he creates. Like, ruin and preservation. Even though they're not a force on this world, he's taking themes from Mistborn and like kind of putting them on their own spin, like in this minor way. Oh, that was cool. So like a little thing I noticed.
So something that jumped in my mind back when we were recording the first episode of this that I couldn't really bring up because of cross-book things. Vasher is in Stormlight, and he is Zahel in Stormlight, the Ardent, and I read Stormlight first and then read Warbreaker after finishing Oathbringer. I did know who he was by the end of Oathbringer, even though I didn't know when I was reading Words of Radiance, but it meant that I went into Warbreaker knowing that Vasher was in Stormlight, Nightblood was in Stormlight, and I was like, oh, cool, I can't wait to see like this story about like Vasher, like, and his backstory and like him like doing great things. And then I was really confused for most of the book where it's like, are you the bad guy in this? I don't know how to reconcile these two things because you seem to be a good guy, but now you're being the bad guy. And how does this all fit together? So that was a very interesting experience that I had going from Stormlight to Warbreaker, knowing that he is a world hopper in another book. And now that we've got Rhythm of War, we know that there is probably more to his role than there had been before because we get more about magic systems when he talks to Kaladin, and we get just like more of him being in the book. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Warbreaker was kind of written as like the prelude, pre-story for Vasher and Nightblood for being in Stormlight as well. So
I mean, he's the character the book is named after.
Yeah.
But like that, I'm always interested on like the people who read it in the opposite order, because like I had obviously read Warbreaker first before Words of Radiance, and I can actually remember because this was back before Discord in the old IRC days. I was private messaging back and forth with. Because he had finished the book before me with Windrunner, David, live blogging my reaction to like the end of the book. So it's like I was very excited about the Shard Spear, and then it was, oh, Nightblood is here, and I had twigged that Zahel was a world hopper and like probably from Nalthis, but I didn't connect him to Vasher until that conversation with David, and he's like, oh yeah, like Vasher's in the book too, like did you see him? And it's like, oh, like that, what's going on? It was very exciting for me. And then we see Vivenna in Oathbringer, Azure, because apparently she's super connected with the color blue in Warbreaker. I did actually find the line. It's like he gives her an outfit of blue clothing at one point. I'm like, don't necessarily agree that she's heavily associated with the color blue, but she's in that book. It's interesting seeing her at like such a different point. In Warbreaker, we see like her on the first steps of the journey to become Azure.
And that was really interesting going the other way as well, because like in Oathbringer, she's obviously grown up a lot and like is a lot more capable and quite likable as well. And then like going back to Warbreaker and like watching her have to grow up by going to Hallandren was definitely interesting because I really liked her in Oathbringer. So it was a little bit of a shock to come back to character. I'm like, I don't like how you act very much. But she does Awakening as well in Oathbringer on the ship when they're escaping. So there's like a small mention of that. So Brandon is slowly putting things in.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
then we get Rhythm of War, where there's just an entire Awakening battle.
With the sheets. That was great.
I love that scene.
yeah, it's great. We get another explanation of the returns, like going more into like them as cognitive shadows. Are they really the same person they were, or is it just investiture that thinks it's a person? One of the fundamental questions of the Cosmere.
Vasher really seems to have gone from a very Nalthus magic-based explanation of a lot of this that they came up with as the Five Scholars and like expanded that a lot more in between the time of Warbreaker and Stormlight to be a lot more Cosmere aware and a lot more Cosmere general, because it can't just be based off that one system.
Yeah, he like explicitly says, oh, like I was missing things. And he added the real type one should be like investiture that has achieved sentience on its own, acknowledging Syl, who I believe was invisible at the time. But like he has life sense, which is probably to some extent investiture sense.
You can't sense drabs.
Even though they still have innate investiture, it's
one thing I always found interesting with the Awakened fight scene is, doesn't Kaladin say at the very end that there's a bunch of scarbs that are now gray?
I assume so.
Which
something like that
is interesting because it kind of plays into the way that the magic works, and you can't substitute Stormlight for just the basic rules of Awakening.
Yeah, Stormlight theoretically could take the place of the breath, but not of the color. Not that anybody's figured out how to do it yet, but theoretically possible.
But it's cool that Vasher is still being a scholar. Like, he never seems to have stopped trying to learn how to do things better or like learn new techniques or new things about the magic. And he's constantly like updating the way that he sees things. And like he never stopped being a scholar, even though he kind of went through a giant period where he wasn't like actively acting like a scholar with other people.
It's funny, going back to our recording yesterday for Navani and Ravoniel, being a scholar is who he is. It's not something he can turn off. Even if he's not actively engaging in scholarship, it's going to affect how he thinks in everything.
Yep. I have actually many times in this episode thought back to the episode we recorded yesterday, which really dates this one, so people kind of know when things are recorded. But we just recorded the Navani and Rabaniel episode, and you should definitely watch that because we go into a lot of detail on the characterization of evil characters. And I kept thinking of Denth, like when we were talking about characters earlier, and it's like, wow, Denth and like Rabaniel, like they're both evil characters, but evil in different ways. But they also show this genuineness when they are interacting with the person they're trying to manipulate and use it in different ways. And I think Denth really is manipulating Vivetta a lot, but he is also being pretty straightforward and open about it. She just doesn't realize that because there is some naivety there, and she thinks that like people are inherently good and going to help her, and they're not there to help her. They're there to help themselves. Mish, did you want to talk about the connection and language thing?
Yes. So in the last episode, I was curious about what would happen if you were to use connection, and if you could use connection to get around the rule that you have to awaken in your native language.
So I think more of what's going on here is because we know at the 10th heightening, like you can awaken without speaking, like mental commands. This is how the God King is supposed to pass on his breaths, despite not having a tongue and not being able to speak. And this is a little bit of my own personal understanding. Like, don't necessarily take this as Brandon canon, but the words are a framework to help make sure your brain is in like because like there's the visualization part, the words are a part of that. You have to speak in the language your brain uses natively, like the language you think in. So if you can change that, which is possible, like the connection medallions of Scadrial, like do change effectively your native language. That if you tried to awaken, like I do believe it would be whatever language you got switched to.
I imagine an essence mark would also work if it changed the language. Whereas something like what Dalinar does with connection, because I know there's been like a lot of back and forth between people about whether Dalinar is actually like changing languages or whether he's just hearing things differently and like the other person is hearing things differently. So it'd be interesting whether that would work with the languages.
Yeah, I don't think so, because like that's just like adding a new language. It's not, he's not losing Alethi as a language. He's just gaining Makabaki, for example.
Yeah.
He would still have to awaken in Alethi, I think.
And then there's whatever Hoyt does, which who knows what Hoyt does and what language he would have to speak.
I love Hoyt.
Hoyt does have breath because
and he does awaken. Pitch. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he does awaken at end of Oathbringer, but he remarks on having perfect pitch in Words of Radiance. And he also stores memories in breath, which is what Terravodium uses against him at the end of Rhythm of War, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
So, like, there's a lot of fundamental magic things that are underlying a lot of the awakening, the breaths, the heightenings, and go into the things like intent and commands and all of that started in this book, like you said in the last episode, Ian, that have just like evolved so much into the rest of the Cosmere, like what we get in Rhythm of War, what we get in Dawnshard as well.
Yeah, like Dawnshards explicitly, like holding a Dawnshard like does give some heightening like effects. What that means, like we still really don't know. There are these fundamental pillars of the Cosmere, and like Warbreaker is one of them, despite the story of Warbreaker not having Cosmere-wide effects. The understanding it provides us as readers is hugely influential. I have a soapbox I want to stand on.
Okay.
So viewers of Shardcast likely know that for a very long time, I believed Edgley was a dragon. Because like there's an offhand line at some point about like Turtelier being a dragon's nest, and like Brandon said like, oh yeah, dragons are part of like the lore on Nalthis for a reason. I'm like, obviously the god is a dragon, like it'd be so cool. And then Brandon said that cultivation was the only dragon. I'm like, that's lame. Brandon did make Warbreaker less cool when he made Edgley not a dragon. And it makes me sad, and I need to bring it up.
That's fair.
He could always change it. It's not book canon yet.
Yeah, it's not book canon. He better change it. Make Warbreaker interesting again.
Time for a petition.
Yes. And another Weiry brand theory, because Vasher at one point has the remarks that he doesn't understand why Ostrism turned its back on awakening. Because back when the royals were the monarchs of what became Hallandren, they were all for awakening research. They were patrons of the Five Scholars, I'm assuming. I'm pretty sure that's a reasonable assumption. But it was only after they went up to Edges that it was like, they were like, awakening bad, rah, rah, rah. So I have a theory that there's an avatar of autonomy on Nalthis portraying itself as Austri. And like, that's why, and kind of like turning the culture away from awakening. Because it reminds me of the Sand Lord in Taldane being very anti sand mastery. I'm just going to give that theory to the world.
You talking about that got in my head that like Denth and Shashara had the royal luck, so they must have been part of the royal family.
Presumably.
And then the royal family split off, but they didn't. But it's also said that the Five Scholars joined different sides in the war. So it is very interesting that the two Five Scholars that were part of the royal family split away from everyone else who seemed to go north and change what they believed.
It's also interesting that there's 5 scholars and then there's the 5 visions. I almost wonder if the 5 visions are a reaction to the 5 scholars.
No, 5 visions came prior. Like they're from the first returned.
The tenets of ostracism that are the core. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like the 5 visions came from Vo, the first returned.
And going with Egli and Vo and all of that, like all of this is pretty new in terms of like timeline of a civilization on a planet and like how long it has been since the first return happened and now, which kind of asks the question of when did endowment actually go to Nalthis and like settle down there, and what was she doing before that? Because of course there's everything going on with Odium up until a certain point, and how was she involved with that? Like what else was she doing before she like stopped on Nalthis and kind of made that her planet?
The letters in the Stormlight epigraphs, we do have one from endowment. It's one of the 3 in Oathbringer. And she's very dismissive of Hoyd. Hey, like I totally noticed when you were here. She definitely holds to the agreement of the shards before the shattering that like they would not interfere with one another. I definitely believe off doing her own thing. Whether or not when she came to Nalthis, like that is a very good question. And I know it's been a question of the fandom for a while because Awakening is still so new and the Returned are still so new.
And she's also very confident in her ability to interfere with Odium if she had to. Like she seemed very confident that she would be able to do something against him.
I'm still wondering how involved she was with the awakening of Nightblood. Like, is Nightblood her contingency plan?
I mean, if so, it works successfully-ish.
Ish.
The question remains whether or not the end result is better or worse than what we had before, but...
Yeah.
It's very cultivation-like in how cultivation has her future vision to a certain point, and like she tries to put things in place with that, and whether endowment was doing the same thing with Nightblood. And if she was, then Nightblood's kind of featured in both of their plans.
Yeah. It's interesting. Endowment is the one who returns the returned. Like she gives them a divine breath that kind of staples them back into their body. If you believe like they are the person, or at least resurrects the body. And the returned do return with purposes. So it's a question, like she probably cherry picks them. Like, yes, I like the thing you would return to. I will return you. Now that would screw up with my plans. You can just die. Brandon's been asked about this, and like he's kind of called her out as being somewhat erratic in terms of who she chooses to return.
I mean, that would make sense since she chooses to return people from Idris and they don't do much of anything. I mean, they just return, say, hey, thanks for having me back. I love you. Goodbye. And then die again.
Unless they run away to Hallandren.
I do wonder whether this is something that she is voluntarily doing or whether it is a compulsion of the shardic nature that she has to bring people back.
It's a good question. I don't think he's been asked about that.
If it is a compulsion, and it's a compulsion on a certain area, it would explain why she even bothers to return people from other cultures.
With like some return coming back and then just dying a week later. Like it does seem not the best move to do that, but if she has to bring people back, then like kind of looking into their futures of what they could do, then she's kind of picking on that, maybe.
And there's always the chance that like she, during that week, they do something. There might be secret, hidden, shardic reasons to return someone that will only live for a week.
One of the notes that somebody has is Nalthian customs, and I'm very curious about what that means.
Yes. If you visit Nalthis in the cognitive realm, they have customs officers. That you have to go through to get on and off the world.
That's amazing.
Yes, it is beautiful.
Has Brandon dated that? Story-wise? Or it's just kind of this is a thing and we don't quite know when it's a thing?
Not to say that he just said it was a thing and I don't think he dated it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a question from JordanCon 2018. And it was basically like, how many people are traveling between worlds? Can you just go on vacation to places? Goes into a lot of like the methods of the things. And it eventually gets to, if you want to go on vacation in the Cosmere, like, I want to go somewhere different, go to Nalthis. Nalthis is great to go to, right? They even have customs that you can go through. You can like arrive and things like that. Don't go to Cell. So yeah, when they have customs, who knows? They have them at some point.
Yeah. Just curious as like whether the customs are in place like for the Warbreaker book and like when all of this is happening. Because that definitely sounds like the case for Stormlight and current timeline and where everything's at. Because we know that there's quite a lot of travelers going between Roshar and Nalthis, at least, like from the Shadesmar sequence in Rhythm of War, because they go in the direction of how to get to Nalthis, and there is a lot of travelers.
So I've been doing some research, and Brandon is frustratingly vague. Either just straight up raffoing the question, or there's one is like, from Trey Cooper, is like, the process with which those returns are chosen, is that deliberate from endowment, or is there a process that was put into place to select? Brandon, yes. It's like, there's two options there. We don't know. But actually, from a Words of Radiance San Diego signing from Langton, this is paraphrased. I'm just going to preface that. If an endowment were killed, would the return still come? Brandon, somebody needs to hold the magic. If no one holds the magic will start to gain sentience. Interesting and bizarre things happen then. So I would say yes, but with the caveat that whoever picks up the power, or what happens with the power, could end up changing that. So it looks like there might be some sort of automated process in place. Possibly. Still so much we don't know. So many mysteries too. Always another secret. Have to use that.
Secret.
Also, endowment is the shard Hoyd would have picked. I'm pretty sure. I think that's the one. If Hoyd were tempted by a shard, which one would it be? Brandon, endowment. Which is interesting.
What I would love to get is one of those like shardic descriptions of endowment that Brandon's given for like ruin and preservation and odium. I just want to know what endowments would be.
We've done a Shardcast episode on endowment, and I want to say Grace came up with one that was really good. I'm pretty sure like she's done one at some point. I definitely want to see something like that. Oh, we also get Hoyd has a story in this book where he's pretending to be older than he is with a long beard, which is just a hilarious image.
And it's very obvious that he's not as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like he has this like really unique storytelling style with like a lot of sand and like dust and stuff. And when he gets asked like, oh, where did you learn this? And like he refers to a place where like a world where two lands meet and gods have died, which I don't know if it's been explicitly confirmed, but most people believe is Yolen, which if you don't know is like where Adidalzium got shattered. It's like the birthplace of humanity in the Cosmere. It also has like two competing ecologies, what we would consider normal, and then the Fane life, which is really cool. It's like that hidden message very early on in the Cosmere, like, oh, what does that mean?
And I think it comes up in Stormlight. I might be wrong. I don't think it comes up in Warbreaker, but Vasher's name for Hoyd is Dust. From memory.
It does come up in Warbreaker. He refers to himself as Dust.
It's just an...
No. It happens in an early draft of Warbreaker, but the published version, it does not use dust.
You're right. It is Hoyd. I see. I read the version where he's dust, and so in my head, he's always been dust. And
yeah, it's one of those things. It's part of the fandom knowledge base. That's one of the things that kind of like twigs that Zahel as a world hopper, as Vasher, is like his use of dust. Even though like that doesn't actually show up in the book. And I'm pretty sure Brandon forgot it doesn't show up in the actual book. He just assumed like, oh yeah, like that's the name Hoyd was using on Nelthis, forgetting he changed it.
See, I always forget. So
it's very accurate to what he is doing with the storytelling. And I assume that that is where the name comes from.
Probably.
It can just join the list of Hoyd's aliases that we hear once and never come up again.
Any further thoughts from anybody? We covered everything big.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, that has been Warbreaker. Hopefully you've enjoyed rereading this book as much as we have. And thank you for watching. You can find us at 17thshard.com for all the news, discussion, theories, and fun you could ever want. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud. You can leave us a review on iTunes. You can subscribe on YouTube, and you can also support us on Patreon. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.